For decades, we have been told that the path to happiness lies within, that the ultimate goal of human existence is to find oneself, love oneself, and fulfill oneself. But what if this obsession with the self isn't a form of progress, but a new kind of secular religion? In his provocative and groundbreaking book, Psychology as Religion, Paul C. Vitz delivers a stinging critique of modern psychology, arguing that it has moved far beyond science to become a substitute for traditional faith. He calls it selfism, a dogma that places the I at the center of the universe, replacing the altar of God with the mirror of the ego. Vitz, a seasoned psychologist himself, dismantles the popular theories of giants like Maslow, Rogers, and Fromm, revealing how their teachings have stripped humanity of its moral responsibility and spiritual depth. He argues that by making self-gratification the highest virtue, modern psychology has inadvertently created a culture of isolation, narcissism, and existential emptiness. We are no longer citizens or believers. We have become clients in search of a happiness that always seems just out of reach. In this deep dive for Read and Rise, we are going to explore how psychology became the secular religion of our time. We will look at how the language of needs replaced the language of duties, and how the pursuit of the self has led to the fragmentation of the family and society. This is a journey into the heart of the modern identity crisis, offering a powerful perspective on why true fulfillment cannot be found in the mirror, but in something far greater than ourselves. Before we uncover the hidden doctrines of the religion of self, make sure to subscribe to Read and Rise. Join our community as we challenge modern myths and seek the truths that truly allow us to rise. Subscribe now, and let's begin this intellectual awakening. The first core idea: the birth of selfism and the deification of the ego. The primary argument Paul Vitz presents is that modern psychology, particularly the humanistic school led by figures like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, has ceased to function as a neutral science and has instead evolved into a secular ideology he calls selfism. This isn't just a clinical approach, it is a full-fledged belief system. Vitz argues that this movement has effectively deified the human ego, placing self-actualization at the pinnacle of human existence, much like salvation was once the goal of traditional religion. In this religion of self, the individual is seen as an inherently perfect being whose only problem is that society, family, or tradition has placed repressive boundaries upon them. The mantra of this new faith is that the self is the ultimate source of truth, morality, and meaning. Vitz meticulously illustrates how this shift occurred. We moved from a world where people asked, "What is my duty to God and my community?" to a world where the only valid question is, "Does this make me feel good about myself?" This transition marks the birth of a radical narcissism disguised as mental health. Vitz warns that this selfism creates a profound moral vacuum. When the self becomes the ultimate judge of what is right and wrong, objective morality disappears. Values become preferences, and virtues become lifestyle choices. The author points out that by removing any external or transcendent authority, psychology has left the individual adrift in a sea of subjective desires. We have been taught that to be healthy is to be independent of all obligations that don't serve our immediate self-fulfillment. For the Read and Rise audience, this is a wake-up call to the sovereignty of the soul. Vitz's critique aligns deeply with the spiritual understanding that the human nafs, or self, if left unchecked and worshipped, becomes a tyrant. This first core idea challenges us to reconsider the modern obsession with self-care and self-love, asking whether we are truly finding ourselves or simply getting lost in an endless hall of mirrors. It forces us to ask, if the self is God, then who is left to save us from ourselves? The second core idea, from sin to syndrome, the secularization of guilt. One of the most profound transformations Paul Vitz identifies is the radical shift in how modern society views human failure. Historically, in almost every major religion and moral philosophy, an individual's harmful actions were understood as sin, a breach of a moral law that required repentance, atonement, and personal responsibility. However, as psychology began to function as a secular religion, it replaced the concept of sin with the concept of sickness or syndrome. Vitz argues that by reclassifying moral failings as psychological dysfunctions or maladjustments, we have effectively abolished human agency. If an action is a symptom of a past trauma or a chemical imbalance, the individual is no longer a moral agent responsible for their choices. They are a victim of their circumstances. This transition has profound implications. We no longer seek forgiveness through transformation, we seek validation through therapy. The confessional has been replaced by the counseling session, but with a crucial difference. In the confessional, one seeks to change themselves to align with a higher truth. In the counseling session, one often seeks to change their perspective to feel better about their existing self. This secularization of guilt has created what Vitz calls a culture of victimhood. When the self is the highest authority, feeling guilty is seen as unhealthy or toxic rather than a necessary signal of the conscience. Modern psychology often treats guilt as a nuisance to be eliminated rather than a moral compass to be followed. This leads to an existential crisis. If nothing is wrong in an absolute sense, then nothing can truly be right. By stripping away the weight of moral responsibility, we have also stripped away the dignity of human choice. We have traded the soul's capacity for greatness and redemption for a fragile, temporary peace of mind. For our community at Read and Rise, this section challenges the very foundation of modern self-help. It asks us to consider if we are using psychological language to hide from our moral duties. Vitz reminds us that true mental health cannot exist in a vacuum of values. A life without the capacity to admit "I was wrong" is a life that can never truly grow. To rise in the truest sense, we must reclaim our status as responsible moral beings capable of both deep failure and magnificent redemption. The third core idea, the fragmentation of the social fabric, selfism versus sacrifice. Once the self is elevated to the status of a deity, all other human relationships are forced to take a subservient position. Paul Vitz argues that the religion of self has inherently destructive consequences for the fundamental units of society: the family, the marriage, and the community. In traditional moral systems, these relationships were built on the principle of sacrifice. The idea that something greater than one's immediate desires, like the welfare of a child or the stability of a marriage, is worth suffering for. However, selfism views sacrifice as a form of repression or self-negation. In this psychological framework, relationships are often treated as contracts for self-fulfillment. We are encouraged to stay in a relationship only as long as it meets our needs or facilitates our growth. The moment a commitment requires profound self-denial or endurance, it is labeled as toxic or stunting. Vitz illustrates how this mindset has fueled the soaring rates of divorce and the fragmentation of the family. When both partners are worshiping at the altar of their own individual egos, there is no common ground left for a shared life. The family, once a sanctuary of unconditional commitment, becomes a collection of competing interests. Furthermore, Vitz points out that this obsession with self-actualization has led to an epidemic of modern loneliness. By teaching people that their primary duty is to themselves, psychology has paradoxically isolated them. True community requires a degree of self-transcendence, the ability to look past one's own ego to serve others. Without this, we are left with a society of autonomous atoms, bumping into each other but never truly connecting. We have traded the warmth of the village and the hearth for the cold, sterile satisfaction of personal space and autonomy. For the Read and Rise audience, this is a profound lesson in the geography of the heart. It reminds us that we are social and spiritual beings whose health is measured not by how much we get from others, but by how much we are capable of giving. Vitz's critique serves as a powerful reminder that rising isn't an individual flight to the top, it is a collective ascent. To truly rise, we must have the courage to bind ourselves to others, to embrace the beautiful burden of responsibility, and to find our purpose in service rather than in the mirror. The fourth core idea, breaking the mirror, the restoration of the transcendent. In the final movement of his critique, Paul Vitz doesn't just leave us in the wreckage of selfism. He offers a profound alternative, the restoration of the transcendent. He argues that the existential anxiety and persistent emptiness of modern life are the direct results of trying to fill a God-shaped hole with a self-shaped plug. If psychology is a religion that fails, it is because it lacks a true object of worship. Vitz proposes that for humanity to truly heal, we must move from self-actualization to self-transcendence. To transcend the self is to acknowledge that there is a reality, a truth, and a creator that exist independently of our feelings and desires. Vitz suggests that true mental health is found when the individual breaks the mirror and looks out the window. This shift requires a return to the classic virtues, humility, suffering with purpose, and objective truth. Instead of asking, "How can I be happy?" the healthy soul asks, "What is the truth and how can I serve it?" This is the path of the responsible self versus the expansive self. Vitz emphasizes that traditional religion provides something psychology never can, a framework for suffering. While selfism views suffering as a mistake or an obstacle to be removed, a transcendent worldview sees suffering as a potential source of meaning and transformation. By reconnecting with the divine and the communal, the individual is no longer the lonely center of a meaningless universe. They become a vital part of a grand, eternal narrative. The I is no longer a god to be served, but a vessel to be filled with purpose. For the Read and Rise audience, this final chapter is the ultimate rise. It teaches us that the highest peak of human development isn't the perfection of the ego, but the surrender of it to something greater. Paul Vitz's masterpiece invites us to stop being clients of our own desires and start being servants of a higher calling. To truly rise is to realize that you are not the sun around which the world revolves, but a light that shines brightest when it reflects the source of all light. The Epilogue, Beyond the Mirror, the Ascent of the Soul. As we stand at the end of this profound exploration of Paul Vitz's Psychology as a Religion, we are left with a truth that is both sobering and liberating. The modern cult of the self is a palace of mirrors, beautiful to look at, but ultimately a prison that leads nowhere. Vitz has shown us that when we turn psychology into a religion, we don't just lose our faith, we lose our grip on reality. We trade the solid, demanding, and magnificent journey of moral growth for a soft, hollow, and never-ending pursuit of self-validation. We have been promised that by worshiping ourselves, we would find freedom, but instead, we have found an epidemic of loneliness, a fragmentation of the family, and a soul that is never quite actualized enough. The brilliance of Vitz's message lies in its call to return to a world where right and wrong are not just feelings, but compass points, to return to a life where sacrifice is not a burden, but the highest expression of love. And most importantly, to return to the understanding that we are created beings with a purpose that exceeds our own survival and comfort. This book is not an attack on the science of the mind, but a defense of the sanctity of the soul. It reminds us that while psychology can help us understand our shadows, only a connection to the transcendent can lead us toward the light. For the Read and Rise community, this summary is a challenge to your worldview. It asks you to have the courage to be unmodern, to value duty over desire, and truth over ego. The path to truly rising does not lead deeper into the self, but higher above it. It is found when we stop asking what the world owes us and start asking what we owe to the truth. True greatness is not found in a self that is served, but in a self that is surrendered to a noble cause, a loving community, and a divine creator. Thank you for joining us on this intellectual and spiritual ascent. If this journey through the hidden doctrines of our time has resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Are you ready to look beyond the mirror? Don't forget to like this video and share it with those who are searching for a deeper meaning in this noisy world. Subscribe to Read and Rise. Together, let's keep challenging the illusions of the age and rising toward the truths that endure. Knowledge is the foundation, but transcendence is the destination. We'll see you in the next chapter.